We are diving straight into the very first pillar of human geography today, urbanization and the massive ongoing movement of human populations. Right now, literally as we speak, we are seeing this monumental shift of people packing up, leaving the countryside, and moving into towns and urban centers.
50%. Back in 2007, the United Nations announced a major global tipping point defined by this single number. For the absolute first time in human history, over half of the world's population officially lived in urban areas. And that trend, it has only continued to accelerate, fundamentally changing how and where we live on this planet.
So what is actually causing this massive rural to urban migration? Why are people packing up their entire lives? We can really boil this down to two main forces: push and pull factors. Push factors are the harsh, negative realities forcing people out of the countryside. Think devastating natural disasters, severe droughts, or just a sudden catastrophic lack of employment. Contrast that with the pull factors, drawing people in. Towns and cities offer this magnetic promise of a better quality of life, access to education, and, crucially, significantly more job opportunities.
Now, when those pull factors go into absolute overdrive, we get the rise of the megacity. By definition, a megacity is an urban area boasting a staggering population of 10 million or more people. And what's fascinating is that more than two-thirds of these massive cities are actually located in newly emerging economies and lower-income countries. The absolute fastest-growing examples right now are exploding in places like Nigeria and Brazil.
As these cities grow at breakneck speeds, while housing all these new arrivals becomes an immense challenge, and we're seeing some wildly different solutions to this. On one hand, you have Lagos, Nigeria. They're utilizing what's called tempo housing to cope with a rapidly rising population that desperately needs affordable living. They are literally building homes out of recycled shipping containers for around 4,300 pounds. They're completely plumbed in, and the construction process actually provides formal sector jobs. Then on the completely opposite end of the spectrum, you have London. There, the strategy for the rundown Docklands area was to let developers come in, completely demolish the old infrastructure, and just regenerate the entire area from the ground up.
Let's weigh up that London Docklands regeneration, because it is a perfect example of balancing economic opportunity against social challenges. Economically and environmentally, massive success. It brought in 2,700 new businesses, and they planted thousands of trees, completely revitalizing what was a declining, polluted area. But on the social side, it heavily outpriced the original local residents. Suddenly, they could no longer afford to live in their own neighborhoods. And to make matters more complicated, the locals effectively lacked the highly specialized skill sets required for the new high-tech and financial jobs being created right on their doorstep. It is a classic geographic dilemma. Who really benefits from urban renewal?
Okay, so as populations urbanize, their economies transform too. The demographic transition model actually charts how countries develop across 5 distinct stages. You start at stage 1. This is where isolated groups, like Amazonian tribes, experience both high birth and high death rates. As basic healthcare and sanitation improve, death rates start to fall. That's stage 2, like we see in Kenya. Then, as education and contraception improve, birth rates dramatically drop in stage 3, like in India. By stage 4, think the UK. Both rates are low and the population stabilizes. Finally, in stage 5, places like Japan actually see a falling death rate paired with an exceptionally low birth rate, which leads to a shrinking population. It's a fascinating roadmap of human development.
But how do we actually measure that development reliably? Because let's be honest, just looking at a country's bank account doesn't give us the whole story. That is exactly where the Human Development Index, or HDI, comes in. It is widely considered the absolute most reliable measure of a nation's progress because it combines both social and economic indicators. Specifically, it looks at life expectancy, income, and the amount of education a person receives. That gives us a much more accurate, three-dimensional picture of a country's true development level, far beyond what money alone can show us.
Unfortunately, as you probably know, development across the globe is incredibly uneven. So why is that? Well, growth is generally propelled or stalled by 2 main categories: physical and human factors. Physical geographic barriers might mean a country is completely landlocked, making international trade incredibly difficult. Or maybe it suffers from an extreme climate or frequent natural hazards that prevent reliable farming. On the human side, development can be heavily stalled by things like political corruption, poor healthcare, or the lingering, extractive histories of colonialism which stripped wealth away in the past.
So, what are we actually doing globally to close this wealth gap? Well, there are 4 core strategies utilized today.
First, we have microfinance loans. These provide small, empowering financial grants to local individuals so they can set up their own businesses from the ground up. Then there's foreign direct investment, or FDI, where one country or a large corporation invests directly into the property or infrastructure of another. We also utilize massive international debt relief, which allows poorer nations to spend their money on developing schools and hospitals rather than just paying off crippling interest. And finally, fair trade. This is a system entirely dedicated to ensuring farmers get a sustainable, fair price for their raw produce.
If you want to see a development strategy actually working in real time, just look at Tunisia's tourism boom. This is the economic multiplier effect in pure action. By heavily investing their resources into attracting tourists, they didn't just end up with more hotels. That outside money flowed through the entire society. Local incomes quadrupled. And because there was more money for schools, national literacy rates hit 79%. Even better, increased exposure to other cultures helped challenge social attitudes, which led to schooling becoming compulsory for girls. It absolutely proves that direct economic investment can radically transform a society's social metrics.
But keep in mind, uneven development isn't just a global issue between entirely separate countries. It happens internally, even within highly developed nations. Take the UK's well-known North-South divide, for instance. Historically, the South, particularly around London, has been significantly wealthier than the more remote, post-industrial North. To bridge this internal economic gap, governments will often deploy massive, sometimes controversial infrastructure projects. A prime example is the £50 billion HS2 high-speed rail project. The entire goal here is to physically and economically connect these distant regions to help spread the wealth and opportunity a bit more evenly.
Okay, so to sustain all of this urbanization and economic growth we've been talking about, we rely heavily on three absolute basic needs: food, water, and energy. The inescapable challenge of our time is that as our populations and our wealth increase, our global demand for these three pillars is rapidly outstripping our supply.
Let's take food, for example. To meet the exploding demand in places like the UK, farming has had to completely transform into what we call agrobusiness. Essentially, this means treating agriculture like a massive large-scale industrial business. The huge benefit here is high efficiency and incredible food output to ensure all those growing cities are fed. But the flip side is the heavy environmental toll. Intensive farming relies heavily on chemical pesticides and artificial fertilizers, which can cause significant damage to local wildlife and incredibly fragile ecosystems.
Then we have the incredible challenge of water. And honestly, here's where physical geography plays a bit of a cruel trick on us. Take a look at the water stress in the UK. You have this massive geographic mismatch. The vast majority of the rainfall naturally happens in the remote, mountainous, and much less populated north. But the massive demand for that water, that's all the way down in the densely populated, heavily urbanized, and much drier south. We literally have to build massive transfer schemes to pump water across the entire country just to keep the southern cities hydrated.
$62 billion. Just let that number sink in for a second. When a geographic water mismatch happens on a mega scale, the solutions are staggering. This is the projected cost of China's South-North Water Transfer Project. It is an absolute mammoth undertaking designed to move 44.8 billion cubic liters of water every single year from the relatively water-rich south of China all the way up to the desperately parched, heavily industrialized north.
But at what cost? And I don't just mean the financial burden here. We have to evaluate the human and environmental impacts of a mega project like this against its successes. On the plus side, it creates a reliable water supply for 20 million people in the north, and it massively boosts their industrial and agricultural development. But to do this, raising the dams forced 345,000 local people to entirely relocate their lives. Furthermore, flooding that much land is doing irreversible damage to natural, fragile ecosystems. It solves a major problem for sure, but it creates profound new ones in its wake.
So, you might be wondering, is there a more sustainable way to manage resources on a smaller scale? Enter Kenyan sand dams. In a hot, dry climate where water is incredibly scarce, local communities build a simple 1-meter-high dam across a seasonal riverbed. It's brilliant in its simplicity. When it rains, the water slows down, and sand deposits behind the dam, trapping the water within it. Crucially, because the water is trapped inside the sand, the blazing sun cannot evaporate it. Locals can then simply dig shallow wells right into the sand to retrieve fresh water all year round. It's incredibly sustainable. It uses local materials, employs local workers, and causes almost zero damage to the environment.
Which brings us to the ultimate geographic dilemma of our time.
We've seen homes built from shipping containers, multi-billion-pound high-speed rail lines, and absolutely staggering water transfer megaprojects. As our global population relentlessly grows and our cities expand into towering megacities, we have to ask ourselves, do the benefits of these massive resource-shifting megaprojects truly outweigh their deep environmental and social costs? It's a complex, critical question every single one of us needs to weigh up as we navigate this changing world. Thanks for exploring this explainer with me today.